Okay. Bruce?
Yes, I have a question.
I'm just curious, in your opening remarks, you talk about the commissioners can only have the power of the purse and don't have control over other positions within the county. Why do the commissioners have to have that control, you believe?
Thank you for the question. You asked a question that I was going to address in my closing remarks, but I'll get to it right away. I'm not a county commissioner. I'm not a politician. I'm not an administrator. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not a politician. I'm not an administrator. I don't speak from the standpoint of somebody who is steeped in policy and administration. I'm a clinician. I have spent the last 40 years of my life working in hospitals and surgery centers and watched as my industry, the healthcare industry, has attempted to reform itself decade after decade after decade without success. And in my observation, it's largely because we've tried to reform healthcare utilization by controlling costs. Whether it's the government or the Navy or the Army or the private insurance business, they've all tried to control the utilization of healthcare by tightening expenditures. And it hasn't worked. Healthcare costs have just ballooned and ballooned year after year. It seems to me that there's a lesson to be learned from that by county governments, local governments, and that is that in order to control the process, in order to control utilization, you have to control the process. You have to be intimately involved in a direct way, not indirectly, a more direct way with the people who are doing the work for you. Does that answer your question?
Well, kind of. I mean, in the sense that you're using healthcare as an example, and I always find that one interesting because rarely when they talk about reforming healthcare do they include doctors in that equation as really trying to drive that process to help deliver, quality healthcare to people. For some reason, it's the bureaucrats that always play a much larger role in that. Just with respect to your opening statement, the other officers are held accountable by the people, obviously, and the commissioner's job is to have the power of the purse string. So, again, your healthcare example, I understand that for healthcare, but this is government, and I'm just trying to really understand why the commissioners, because last week that's what Commissioner Filio said several times. We don't have the control, we don't have the power. And it makes me wonder if there isn't some sort of a power shifting endeavor here that's going on, because that seems to be the theme, is the commissioners need to have more power. But it comes at the expense of another party, which I'm sure you would know who that is, the people. So, well, you're making officers accountable to someone above them. They get a boss as opposed to their constituents. And so part of this is just understanding, why are people, why do you think this? What does that benefit? How do you quantify that benefit, even if you can? I mean, with healthcare, you can quantify that in some way, shape, or form.
I could attempt to respond to that by maybe extending the analogy with healthcare to say that none of us knows, as consumers, let's say we're consumers of healthcare in the same way that we're consumers of county services. Have you ever had surgery? And if so, do you know what that surgery cost? If, for instance, you had a C-section, a cesarean section, or you had your gallbladder out, or everybody in this room is old enough to have had a colonoscopy, do you know what that procedure cost? And I would bet you don't. And that's because there are so very many ways in which healthcare is paid for, and so many middlemen, and the consumer, the patient, doesn't really understand what's going on. In the same way that I think voters don't really understand what's going on. It requires somebody who is intimately involved on a month-to-month, year-to-year basis, who isn't subject to recall or subject to being reelected or replaced every couple of years, to provide some consistency.
When you say going on, what do you mean by that? Like the voter doesn't know what's going on? Are you talking about just the internal workings of an office? Or are you talking about their satisfaction or dissatisfaction with the deliverable of their service?
Well,
I mean, and let me give you an example. With my health care, which is grandfathered in before Obamacare, after, I think it's $2,000, it's 100% covered. Okay, I was very happy with that. All right, so, I pay for that, and you're right, I don't know how much they charge at the hospital. I think it was actually under the previous presidential administration, they tried to make that public for people who went to the hospital, so they could see how much it cost.
yes.
And I think they may have stopped that. I don't know, since the new, I don't know,
I can
but,
speak to that.
yeah, but,
They did try to enact that, but the hospitals won't.
they don't want to do it. They don't want to do
They won't
it.
tell you what
Yeah.
they charge.
That's
And
right.
so as I pointed out, it's very, very difficult to know.
So, but with respect to the citizens, not knowing
Who's trying to wrap it up?
Yeah, with not knowing what's going on in government, what do you mean by that? By not knowing what's going on?
To take just one example, I read the other day, and I don't mean to point the finger at the sheriff's office, but this is just the example that comes to mind. Sheriff's office says that they might be unable to provide coverage to the Hayden City schools. How is the parent of a child at Hayden schools supposed to know why it is and what does it require to have a police officer in their schools? They can't possibly know that.
Well, that's actually something that can be answered, but that's a different discussion. So, but I understand your concern from that perspective. Thank you.